After years of making herself invisible in a suffocating relationship, Joanne Brooks escapes to Provence with nothing but a broken heart and a desperate need to breathe. She rents a quiet cottage, seeking solitude and a chance to rediscover who she is. But peace shatters the moment she meets her neighbor. Dylan Marchand is powerful, magnetic, and wrapped in shadows. A self-made magnate with dangerous enemies and darker secrets, he's everything she should avoid. Yet when he looks at her, she feels seen for the first time in years, truly seen in all her messy, complicated truth. One dinner turns into stolen moments. Stolen moments ignite into something neither can deny. But Dylan's past refuses to stay buried. When ruthless men come for him, Joanne becomes their target, a weakness they can exploit, a pressure point to break him. Suddenly, the woman who came to Provence to disappear finds herself in the middle of a deadly game where love is the ultimate vulnerability and the only thing worth fighting for. She ran from one dangerous relationship. She never expected to fall into another, where the danger is real, but so is the love. The taxi rattled along the narrow road, leaving behind the noise of Marseille airport. Joanne pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching the lavender fields blur into ribbons of purple beneath the fading afternoon light. She didn't look back. There was nothing left to look back to. Her phone had been silent for 3 days now. No texts, no apologies. Just the ghost of a relationship that had crumbled under the weight of indifference and quiet cruelty. She'd woken up one morning in London, stared at the ceiling of the flat she'd shared with a man who barely saw her anymore, and made a decision. By noon, she'd booked the ticket. By evening, she was gone. Provence was a name on a map, a place she'd read about in novels where women went to find themselves after heartbreak. It felt absurd, cliché even, but absurdity was better than suffocation. The driver turned onto a gravel path lined with cypress trees, their dark silhouettes cutting into the golden sky like sentinels. At the end of the lane sat a stone cottage, weathered and beautiful, wrapped in ivy and shadows. It looked like something out of a dream she hadn't dared to dream in years. "Voilà, mademoiselle," the driver said, his voice kind. Joanne stepped out, her legs unsteady. The air smelled of earth and wild thyme, and for the first time in months, she took a full breath. The kind that didn't hurt. She paid the driver, watched him disappear down the lane and stood there in the silence. The cottage key was heavy in her palm. She turned it over, feeling the rough metal bite into her skin, grounding her. "This is real. You did this." The door creaked open, revealing whitewashed walls and dark wooden beams. The furniture was simple, old, but cared for. Sunlight poured through the windows, pooling on the terracotta floor like spilled honey. She dropped her suitcase by the door and walked to the window, pressing her hands against the cool stone sill. Beyond the garden, she could see another house, larger, more imposing. A sprawling estate with terracotta roofs and shuttered windows, half hidden by olive groves. Smoke curled lazily from one of the chimneys, a sign of life. A neighbor, then. She told herself it didn't matter. She'd come here to be alone, to disappear, to become someone the world couldn't touch for a while. But as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the valley, she felt it. That pull. The strange certainty that her life had just shifted, that the ground beneath her feet had tilted in a direction she couldn't yet see. She turned away from the window, exhaustion settling into her bones. Tomorrow she'd unpack. Tomorrow she'd figure out what came next. Tonight, she just needed to survive the quiet. The first night was harder than she'd expected. The silence pressed in from all sides, thick and alive. In London there had always been noise, traffic, sirens, the hum of a city that never stopped. Here there was only the wind through the trees and the distant call of something she couldn't name. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind a carousel of regrets and what-ifs. The image of him surfaced unbidden, his face blank as she told him she was leaving. No anger, no pleading. Just a shrug, as if she were a problem solving itself. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing the memory away. "You don't get to haunt me here." Sleep came eventually, restless and fragmented, and when she woke, the room was flooded with light. She sat up slowly, disoriented, and glanced at her phone. 9:47 a.m. She couldn't remember the last time she'd slept past 7. The kitchen was small but charming, with blue painted cabinets and a window overlooking the garden. She made coffee, strong, bitter the way she'd learned to like it, and took it outside. The morning was impossibly beautiful. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of rosemary and something floral she couldn't identify. Birds chattered in the trees. The light was golden soft, the kind that made everything look like a painting. She was halfway through her coffee when she heard it. A voice. Deep. Calm. Speaking in rapid French. She turned, and there he was. Standing at the edge of her garden, just beyond the low stone wall that separated her cottage from the estate next door. Tall, dark-haired, dressed in a simple white shirt rolled to the elbows and dark trousers, he looked like he belonged here in a way she never would. He was on the phone, his back to her, one hand gesturing as he spoke. She couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Authority, control, the kind of voice that didn't ask, it commanded. She should have looked away, gone inside, minded her own business, but she didn't. He turned then as if sensing her gaze, and their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. His eyes were dark, unreadable, a shade somewhere between espresso and midnight. They held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch, as if he could see through her skin to the messy tangle of thoughts beneath. Then, without breaking eye contact, he ended the call. "Bonjour," he said, his voice carrying easily across the space between them. Joanne felt heat crawl up her neck. Bonjour." A flicker of something crossed his face. Amusement, maybe, or curiosity. He took a few steps closer, stopping just short of the wall. "You're the new tenant," he said. His English was flawless, touched with the faintest accent that made every word sound deliberate. "I am." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. Bare feet, tangled hair, yesterday's clothes. Dylan Marchand. He didn't offer his hand across the wall, just inclined his head slightly, a gesture that felt oddly formal and disarming at once. "Joanne," she hesitated. "Joanne Brooks." English. It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. His gaze swept over her, quick and assessing, but not invasive. She had the strange sense that he'd just catalogued everything about her, her uncertainty, her exhaustion, the cracks she thought she'd hidden well. "You picked a quiet place," he said. "That was the idea. Running from something?" The question should have felt intrusive. It didn't. Maybe because his tone wasn't judgmental, just matter of fact, or maybe because the answer was written all over her. "Something like that," she admitted. He nodded slowly, as if that made perfect sense. "Provence is good for that. And you?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. "Are you running too?" For the first time, his expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but close, a softening at the edges. "No," he said quietly. "I'm what people run from." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Before she could respond, he stepped back, lifting a hand in a brief, elegant gesture of farewell. "Welcome to the neighborhood, Joanne Brooks." And then he was gone, disappearing into the olive groves like a shadow swallowed by sunlight. She stood there for a long time after, her coffee growing cold in her hands, her heart beating just a little too fast. "I'm what people run from." She told herself it was a joke, a throwaway line, but the look in his eyes when he'd said it hadn't been joking at all. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of unpacking and forced distraction. She lined books on the shelves, hung clothes in the wardrobe, arranged toiletries in the tiny bathroom. Mundane tasks that should have been soothing, but only made her more restless. Her mind kept circling back to him. Dylan. The name felt foreign on her tongue, unfamiliar and strangely magnetic. She replayed the conversation, analyzing every word, every pause, the way his eyes had locked onto hers like he was solving a puzzle. "I'm what people run from." What did that even mean? By noon, she was desperate to escape the cottage and her own thoughts. She grabbed her bag and walked into the village, a 15-minute stroll down a winding road lined with stone walls and wildflowers. The village was postcard perfect, a small square with a fountain at its center, surrounded by shops with faded awnings and tables spilling onto the cobblestones. She bought bread, cheese, wine, and a small bouquet of sunflowers from a woman who smiled at her broken French. On the way back, she noticed the black car parked near the estate's gate. Sleek, expensive, the kind that didn't belong in a place like this. Two men stood beside it, both in dark suits, speaking in low voices. One of them glanced up as she passed, his gaze sharp and assessing. She looked away quickly, her pulse quickening for reasons she didn't understand. When she reached the cottage, she locked the door behind her, her hands trembling slightly as she set the groceries on the counter. "You're being paranoid." But the feeling lingered. the sense that she'd stepped into something she didn't yet comprehend. That night, she sat in the garden with a glass of wine, watching the stars emerge one by one. The air was cool now, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. She thought about calling her sister, telling her she'd made it, that she was safe. But safe from what? A heartbreak, a life that had stopped fitting, or something else entirely. She took a sip of wine, letting the bitterness roll over her tongue, and tried not to think about the man next door. The one with eyes like a storm and a smile that wasn't quite a smile. The one who'd looked at her like he knew exactly why she'd come here, and exactly what she was running from. Joanne woke to the sound of gravel crunching beneath tires. She lay still, her heart hammering in the dark, straining to hear. The clock on the nightstand read 2:37 a.m. Outside her window, an engine idled low and steady, then cut off abruptly, leaving only the whisper of wind through the trees. She sat up slowly, every nerve alert. Through the thin curtains she could make out shapes moving in the darkness, figures backlit by a dim glow from the estate next door. Voices, low and urgent. French, too rapid for her to catch even a single word. She crept to the window, keeping to the shadows, and peered out. 3 men stood near the wall between the properties. One she recognized, Dylan, his silhouette unmistakable even in the darkness. The other 2 were strangers, their postures tense, hands gesturing sharply as they spoke. One of them raised his voice, anger cutting through the quiet like a blade. Dylan didn't flinch. His response was calm, measured, the kind of tone that carried more threat in its composure than any shout ever could. The angry man stepped closer. For a moment, Joanne thought he might actually swing. Then Dylan moved. It was subtle, just a shift in stance, a straightening of shoulders, but the effect was immediate. The other man stopped mid-step, his hand dropping to his side. Whatever he saw in Dylan's face made him reconsider. They spoke for another minute, quieter now, the heat gone, and then the 2 strangers left, climbing into a dark sedan that disappeared down the lane without headlights. Dylan stood alone in the moonlight, his head bowed, one hand pressed against the back of his neck. He looked tired, human. Joanne stepped back from the window, her pulse still racing. She shouldn't have watched. It was none of her business. But the image stayed with her as she lay back down, staring at the ceiling. I'm what people run from. The words took on new weight now, new meaning. She didn't sleep again that night. Morning arrived with cruel brightness. Joanne forced herself out of bed, splashed cold water on her face, and made coffee she didn't want. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured it, exhaustion and unease tangling into something she couldn't quite name. She'd come here for peace, for solitude. Instead, she'd found... what? A mystery? A warning? Leave it alone, she told herself. It's not your life. But when she stepped outside with her coffee, intending to lose herself in the garden, she found him there. Dylan, sitting on the low stone wall that divided their properties, as if he'd been waiting. Her breath caught. You scared me. I apologize. He stood, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. That wasn't my intention. He looked different in the daylight. Older, maybe. There were shadows beneath his eyes, a tightness around his mouth that hadn't been there yesterday. He wore the same white shirt, now wrinkled, as if he'd been up all night. Did you sleep? The question slipped out before she could think better of it. His mouth curved, but it wasn't quite a smile. No. Silence settled between them, thick with things unsaid. I heard voices last night, Joanne said carefully. It woke me. Something flickered in his eyes. Wariness, or perhaps calculation. I'm sorry, business matter. It shouldn't have disturbed you. Business at 3 in the morning? The kind that doesn't keep office hours. She should have nodded, accepted the non-answer, gone inside. Instead, she held his gaze. Are you in trouble? The question hung between them, bold and foolish. His expression shifted, surprise, then something darker, something almost like respect. That depends, he said slowly, on your definition of trouble. The kind that involves angry men showing up in the middle of the night. Ah. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. You were watching. Heat crept up her neck. I wasn't spying. I was... concerned? Confused. He took a step closer, closing the distance between them until only the wall remained. Up close, she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, the way his jaw tightened when he was thinking. Let me ease your confusion, he said quietly. "I own several businesses. Some of them attract complicated people, people who don't like being told no." "What kind of businesses?" "The profitable kind." It wasn't an answer. It was a deflection, wrapped in charm and delivered with enough honesty to feel like truth. Joanne crossed her arms, the coffee cup warm against her ribs. "That's not very reassuring." "It wasn't meant to be." His gaze didn't waver. "But I'll tell you this, Joanne Brooks. Whatever you heard last night, whatever you think you saw, it won't touch you. You have my word. Why would I trust the word of a stranger?" "Because," he said, and this time his smile was real, brief and devastating, "you're still standing here talking to me." She opened her mouth to respond, but he was already turning away, vaulting over the wall with an ease that spoke of practice. "Wait." He paused, glancing back over his shoulder. "Are you dangerous?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. For a long moment he just looked at her, really looked, as if weighing how much truth she could handle. "Yes," he said finally, "but not to you." And then he was gone, disappearing into the olive groves, leaving her alone with her racing heart and a dozen questions she didn't know how to ask. She tried to focus on the mundane, weeding the garden, reading on the terrace, anything to stop thinking about him. It didn't work. Every sound made her look up. Every movement in the periphery of her vision drew her attention toward the estate. She felt like a moth circling a flame, aware of the danger, but unable to pull away. By evening, frustration had given way to defiance. "This is ridiculous. He's just a man, a neighbor." She poured herself a glass of wine, a generous one, and settled onto the terrace with a book she'd been meaning to read for months. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The air smelled of lavender and wood smoke. She was 3 pages in when she heard footsteps on gravel. Her head snapped up. Dylan emerged from the path between the properties, carrying a basket covered with a linen cloth. He stopped at the edge of her terrace, hesitating in a way that seemed uncharacteristic. "I'm interrupting," he said. "Yes." "I'll be quick." He set the basket on the small table beside her. "A peace offering, for the disturbance last night." She stared at the basket, then at him. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." Slowly she pulled back the cloth. Inside, fresh bread, still warm, cheese, olives, a bottle of wine far better than the one she'd bought in the village, and at the bottom, a small jar of lavender honey, the kind that caught the light like liquid gold. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. "This is too much," she managed. "It's a welcome." He shifted his weight, almost uncomfortable. "And an apology. You came here for quiet. I should have been more careful. Dylan, have dinner with me." The words cut through the evening air, simple and impossible. She looked up sharply. "What?" "Tomorrow night. My house." His hands were in his pockets again, his expression carefully neutral. "Nothing elaborate, just company, if you'd like." Every rational part of her screamed to say no. He was a stranger, a dangerous one by his own admission, a man with secrets that arrived at 3 a.m. in dark sedans. But there was something in his eyes, a loneliness that mirrored her own, a question he was afraid to ask aloud. "Are you brave enough to stay?" "Okay," she heard herself say. Surprise flashed across his face, quickly masked. "Okay? Tomorrow. What time?" 8? "I'll be there." He nodded, a small dip of his chin, and for a moment neither of them moved. The air between them felt charged, electric with possibility and danger in equal measure. "Good night, Joanne." "Good night." She watched him walk away, his figure slowly swallowed by the gathering dusk, and wondered what she'd just agreed to, what she was walking toward, and why, despite every warning bell ringing in her head, she couldn't wait for tomorrow to come. Joanne changed her outfit 4 times before settling on the first one, a simple dress, navy blue falling just below her knees, with delicate cap sleeves that felt right for an evening that wasn't quite a date, but wasn't quite not a date either. She studied herself in the narrow mirror, noting the flush in her cheeks, the nervous energy humming beneath her skin. It's just dinner. With a neighbor. Stop overthinking. But her hands trembled as she fastened a thin silver bracelet, and she knew she was lying to herself. At 7:58 p.m. she stood at her door, staring across the darkening garden toward the estate. Lights glowed warm in the windows, spilling golden rectangles onto the terracotta tiles. Somewhere inside music played, something classical, strings weaving through the evening air. She took a breath, stepped outside. The walk across the shared property felt longer than it should have. Her footsteps crunched too loud on the gravel path. When she reached the main entrance, a heavy wooden door framed by climbing roses, she hesitated. Last chance to turn around. She knocked. The door opened almost immediately. Dylan stood in the doorway, and for a moment, she forgot how to breathe. He'd changed into a dark shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, top button undone. His hair was slightly damp, as if he'd just showered. He looked softer, somehow. Less guarded. "You came," he said, and there was genuine relief in his voice. "You doubted I would? I thought you might reconsider. Most people do when they have time to think. I'm not most people." Something shifted in his expression, a warmth that reached his eyes for the first time. "No, I'm beginning to understand that." He stepped aside, gesturing her in. "Please." The interior took her breath away. Exposed stone walls, vaulted ceilings with dark wooden beams. The space was open and airy, furnished with pieces that looked both antique and comfortable. Worn leather chairs, a massive wooden table, shelves lined with books in multiple languages. Art hung on the walls, originals by the look of them, landscapes mostly, capturing Provence in different lights and seasons. It wasn't what she'd expected. Too warm, too lived in, too human. "This is beautiful," she said, turning slowly to take it all in. "Thank you." He closed the door behind her, his presence a tangible warmth at her back. "I've had time to make it feel like home." "How long have you been here?" 5 years, give or take." He moved past her, leading her deeper into the house. "Wine?" "Please." The kitchen was as stunning as the rest, all white marble and dark wood, with copper pots hanging from hooks and herbs growing in terracotta pots on the windowsill. He poured 2 glasses of red wine with practiced ease, then handed her one. Their fingers brushed, a spark of contact that made her pulse jump. "To new neighbors," he said, raising his glass. "To peace and quiet," she countered, a hint of irony in her tone. His smile was rueful. "I've already failed you there." They drank, and she tasted blackberries and something darker, earthier. It was the kind of wine that cost more than her flight to France. "Dinner's almost ready," Dylan said, moving to the stove where something simmered in a copper pot, filling the air with the scent of tomatoes, garlic, and fresh basil. "I hope you're not vegetarian. I should have asked." "I'm not, and I'm not picky." "Good." He stirred the pot, tasted, adjusted the seasoning with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "Cooking relaxes me. Most people find that strange." "I don't." He glanced at her over his shoulder. "What relaxes you?" The question felt intimate, like he was asking for more than a simple answer. "I used to paint," she admitted. "Watercolors mostly. Nothing good, but it helped me quiet my mind." "Used to." "I stopped a few years ago." "Why?" "Because someone had laughed at her work. Because someone had made her feel small for trying. Because she'd slowly stopped doing all the things that made her feel like herself." "Life got in the way," she said instead. Dylan studied her for a long moment, something like understanding flickering in his eyes. "Life has a habit of doing that." He plated the food with care. Handmade pasta with a ragu that looked like it had been simmering for hours, fresh bread, a simple salad dressed with olive oil and lemon. They ate at the large wooden table sitting across from each other, close enough to talk without shouting, far enough to maintain the fiction of propriety. The food was incredible. "You made this?" Joanne asked between bites, unable to hide her surprise. "My grandmother's recipe. She insisted I learn." Said a man who couldn't feed himself was half a man. "Wise woman." "Terrifying woman," he corrected, but there was affection in his voice. "She ruled our family like a general. When she spoke, everyone listened." "Is she still?" "No. She passed 8 years ago." A shadow crossed his face, brief but unmistakable. "But I think about her every time I make this." Joanne set down her fork, the moment suddenly weighted with shared grief. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." She lived exactly the life she wanted on her own terms. Not many people can say that. "Is that what you're doing? Living on your own terms?" He took a slow sip of wine, considering. "I'm trying." "And those men last night? Do they fit into those terms?" She knew she was pushing, crossing lines she'd promised herself she wouldn't cross. But the wine had loosened her tongue, and more than that, she wanted to know. Needed to understand who this man was, and why she felt so drawn to him despite every warning. Dylan leaned back in his chair, regarding her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You don't let things go, do you?" "Should I?" "Most people would." "I told you, I'm not most people." A smile ghosted across his lips. No, you're really not. He refilled their glasses, then stood, gesturing toward the terrace. Let's take this outside. The night had deepened to full dark, the sky scattered with more stars than Joanne had ever seen in London. They stood at the stone railing, looking out over the valley, where lights from distant villages glittered like fallen constellations. I import things, Dylan said finally, his voice quiet. Wine, olive oil, textiles, luxury goods. I have contacts throughout Europe, North Africa, the Middle East. That sounds legitimate. It is, mostly. Her stomach tightened. Mostly? He turned to face her, his expression serious. In my world, lines blur. A business associate might have other interests. A transaction might involve people I'd rather not deal with, but refusing them outright can be complicated, dangerous. Sometimes. Those men last night wanted me to move something I won't move. His jaw tightened. I told them no. They didn't take it well. What did they want you to move? He shook his head. You don't want to know. Yes, I do. Joanne, if I'm in danger just by being next door, I deserve to know. Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe. Or fear. You're not in danger. I wouldn't let that happen. You can't promise that. I can, and I do. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, smell the faint scent of cedar and citrus that clung to his skin. Whatever happens, whatever comes, it doesn't touch you. That's not negotiable. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Why do you care? I don't know, he admitted, and the raw honesty in his voice stole her breath. But I do. The air between them felt alive, charged with a current she didn't know how to name. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then back to her eyes, a question in the darkness. She should step back, put distance between them, protect herself from whatever this was becoming. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was. Dylan! You should go, he said abruptly, breaking the spell. He stepped back, creating space, his expression shuddering. It's late, I shouldn't have kept you. The dismissal stung more than it should have. I'm not a child. I can decide when to leave. I know. But if you stay... He trailed off, dragging a hand through his hair, frustration clear in every line of his body. You should go. She wanted to argue, to push back against the walls he was rebuilding between them. But something in his face stopped her, a kind of desperation, as if he was protecting her from himself. Thank you for dinner, she said quietly. Joanne. Good night, Dylan. She turned and walked away before she could change her mind, before she could do something foolish like ask him why he was pushing her away, when every moment between them felt like gravity pulling them together. She didn't look back, but she felt his eyes on her the entire walk home, a weight she carried all the way to her door. 3 days passed. Joanne didn't see Dylan once, not in the garden, not on the terrace, not even a glimpse through the windows of the estate. It was as if he'd vanished, leaving only the memory of his voice and the phantom warmth of his nearness. She told herself it was for the best. That distance was wise, necessary. She told herself she didn't care. Both were lies. On the 4th morning, she woke to find a note slipped under her door. Heavy paper, black ink, handwriting that was elegant and precise. I need to go to Avignon for a few days. Business. The property is secure, but if you need anything, call this number. D. Below it. A phone number. Nothing else. She stood in her doorway, staring at the note, feeling the absence of him like a physical thing. He left without saying goodbye. The thought was ridiculous, childish. He owed her nothing. They'd had one dinner, a few conversations. He was a neighbor, not whatever her traitorous heart was trying to make him. She crumpled the note, then immediately smoothed it out again, folding it carefully and tucking it into the book on her nightstand. Just in case. The village became her refuge. She spent her days wandering the narrow streets, sketching in a journal she'd bought from a small art supply shop tucked between a bakery and a wine merchant. The owner, a woman in her 70s with kind eyes and paint-stained hands, had smiled when Joanne purchased charcoal and paper. You're the English girl staying at the old Rousseau cottage, she'd said in accented English. News travels fast. In a village this small? Always. The woman wrapped the supplies in brown paper, her movements careful. You're friends with Monsieur Marchand? Joanne hesitated. We're neighbors. Ah, a knowing look. He's a good man. Complicated, but good. You know him? Everyone knows Dylan. He's done much for this village, for many villages. She handed Joanne the package. But he carries shadows, old ones. Be careful, Sherry. Careful of what? The woman's expression softened with something like pity. Of caring too much for a man who doesn't believe he deserves it. The words haunted Joanne for the rest of the day. On the 5th night, she woke to the sound of breaking glass. Her eyes snapped open, adrenaline flooding her system. She lay perfectly still, straining to hear. The cottage was dark, silent except for the thunder of her heartbeat. Then, footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, downstairs. Terror spiked through her. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand with shaking hands, her finger hovering over the emergency call button. Then she remembered the note, the number. She dialed before she could think better of it. He answered on the first ring. "Joanne?" His voice was sharp, alert. "What's wrong?" "Someone's in my house," she whispered, barely breathing the words. Silence. Then, "Where are you?" "Bedroom, upstairs." "Lock the door. Don't come out. I'm 5 minutes away." "Dylan, I can't." "Lock the door." Each word was a command, brooking no argument. "I'm coming." The line went dead. With trembling hands, she turned the old key in her bedroom lock, then retreated to the corner farthest from the door, clutching her phone like a lifeline. Downstairs the footsteps continued, methodical, searching. What do I have that anyone would want? Nothing. She had nothing. Just clothes, books, a broken heart she'd carried across an ocean. A crash from the kitchen, the sound of drawers being yanked open. She pressed her hand against her mouth, fighting down panic. 5 minutes, he said 5 minutes. It felt like an eternity. Then, voices, shouting. A thud that shook the walls, the crack of something hitting flesh, followed by a groan. Joanne squeezed her eyes shut, terror and adrenaline making her lightheaded. Footsteps on the stairs. Fast. Heavy. Someone tried her door handle. "Joanne!" Dylan's voice, rough with exertion. "It's me. Open the door." Her legs nearly gave out with relief. She stumbled to the door, fumbling with the lock, and yanked it open. He stood in the hallway, breathing hard, his knuckles split and bleeding. Behind him she could see the stairs, the mess below. "Are you hurt?" His hands were on her shoulders, his eyes scanning her face, her body, checking for injuries with an intensity that bordered on frantic. "No, I'm fine, Her voice broke. "What happened?" "Later." He pulled her against him, one hand cradling the back of her head. "You're safe. That's all that matters." She let herself sink into him for just a moment, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the rapid beat of his heart against her cheek. Then reality crashed back. She pulled away. "Is he still down there?" He left, through the back. Dylan's expression was dark, dangerous. "I've called someone to secure the property. They'll be here in 10 minutes. "Who was he? What did he want?" "You're coming with me." It wasn't a request. "Pack a bag. Enough for a few days." "Dylan." "Now, Joanne." The steel in his voice left no room for argument. She grabbed her suitcase, throwing in clothes without thinking, her hands still shaking. He stood in the doorway the entire time, watching the stairs, his body a wall between her and whatever threat lurked below. When she finished, he took the bag from her hand and led her down the stairs. The cottage was a wreck. Drawers overturned, cushions slashed. Someone had torn through her things with violent purpose. "Oh God," she breathed. "Don't look." Dylan guided her toward the door, his hand firm on her lower back. "Just keep walking." 2 men were waiting outside, the same ones she'd seen that first night in dark suits despite the late hour. They spoke rapid French with Dylan, their expressions grim. One of them nodded toward Joanne, asking something she couldn't understand. Dylan's response was curt, final. The men nodded and headed toward the cottage. "They'll clean up. Make sure no one comes back." He led her across the garden toward the estate, his grip never loosening. "You're staying with me until this is resolved." "What is this?" He didn't answer until they were inside, the heavy door locked behind them. Then he turned to her, his expression bleak. They were looking for leverage. "Against who?" "I don't—" "Against me." The words came out flat, heavy with guilt. "They think you matter to me, they're right." The admission hung between them, raw and electric. "I don't understand," she whispered. "The men I refused. They don't accept no." He moved to the bar, poured 2 glasses of whiskey with hands that weren't quite steady. "They're escalating, trying to find pressure points. And they think I'm yours. I've been careful, but not careful enough." He handed her a glass, his fingers brushing hers. "I'm sorry, this is my fault." "It's not." "It is." His voice was harsh, self-recriminating. "I should have stayed away from you. Should have known better. You couldn't have predicted this." "I could have. I did." He downed his whiskey in one swallow, his jaw tight. "I knew what getting close to you might mean. I did it anyway." Joanne set her glass down, untouched. "Then why did you leave? 3 days without a word. To protect you." He laughed, the sound bitter. "Some protection that turned out to be—" "Dylan, you're in danger because of me. Because I was selfish enough to want—" He trailed off, dragging a hand through his hair. "You should hate me. I don't." He looked at her then, really looked, and the naked vulnerability in his eyes took her breath. "You should," he said quietly. She crossed the space between them, closing the distance he'd tried so hard to maintain. "I don't hate you. I'm angry, yes. Scared, definitely. But I don't hate you. Joanne, tell me the truth. All of it." He held her gaze for a long moment, some internal war playing out behind his eyes. Then finally he nodded. "All right," he said. "But you're going to wish I'd stayed a stranger." And as the night deepened around them, he began to talk, to tell her about the business deals that crossed lines, the favors owed, the people who saw violence as negotiation and loyalty as currency. And with every word, Joanne understood more fully what he'd meant that first day. "I'm what people run from." But as she listened, watching the pain and resignation in his face, she made a choice. She wasn't running. Not this time. Dawn broke grey and uncertain, light seeping through the tall windows in pale washes. Joanne sat curled in an armchair, a blanket Dylan had draped over her shoulders sometime in the night. He stood across the room, silhouetted against the window, hands in his pockets, exhaustion etched into every line of his body. They'd talked for hours. He'd told her everything, or as much as she could absorb in one night. The empire he'd built from his grandfather's modest import business. The powerful men who'd wanted pieces of it, the compromises he'd made and the lines he'd refused to cross. The moment when refusing had turned him from an asset into a problem. "The shipment they wanted me to move," he said, his voice rough from talking. "It wasn't wine or textiles, it was people, women, girls, some of them." Joanne's stomach turned. "My God." "I said no. That was 6 months ago. They've been applying pressure ever since." "Why don't you go to the police?" His laugh was hollow. "Some of them are the police or politicians or businessmen whose names you'd recognize." He turned to face her, his expression bleak. "The kind of power they have, it doesn't answer to laws." "Then what do you do?" "Survive. Stay vigilant. Protect the people I care about." His gaze held hers. "But I failed at that last part, didn't I?" "I'm fine. This time. What about next time?" "Then we make sure there isn't a next time." He stared at her, something like disbelief crossing his face. "You should be running, getting as far from me as possible." "I've done enough running." She stood, letting the blanket fall, and crossed to him. "I came to Provence to escape a life that was slowly suffocating me. A relationship where I'd made myself smaller and smaller until I barely existed. I'm not doing that again. This isn't the same." "Isn't it?" She held his gaze, refusing to look away. "You're asking me to disappear, to make myself invisible for my own safety. That's exactly what I left. Joanne, this is different. This is real danger." "I know." Her voice softened. "But I also know I'd rather face danger beside someone who sees me than safety with people who don't." His breath caught. "You don't know what you're saying." "I do." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The air between them felt electric, charged with all the things they hadn't said, all the boundaries they were dancing around. "I can't promise you safety," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not asking you to. I can't promise you normal or easy. I don't want normal. Normal was killing me." "Then what do you want?" The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. What do I want? She'd spent so long denying her own desires, smoothing herself down to fit someone else's vision, that the question felt foreign, dangerous. But standing here in the grey dawn light, with a man who trusted her with his darkest truths, she knew the answer. "I want to feel alive," she said. "I want to matter to someone who matters to me. I want to stop apologizing for taking up space in the world." His eyes darkened. "You matter. Then stop trying to push me away. I'm trying to protect you. I know. But maybe that's my choice to make." He took a step closer, closing the distance between them until she could feel the heat radiating off him, see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "You terrify me," he admitted, his voice raw. "I've faced down men with guns, navigated business deals that could have ended me, walked through fire without flinching, but you—" He reached up, his hand hovering near her face, not quite touching. "You make me want things I have no right to want." "Like what?" "Like this." He closed the distance, his hand finally making contact, cupping her jaw with a gentleness that belied the calluses on his palms. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, a feather-light touch that sent shivers down her spine. "I should let you go," he murmured. "But you won't." "No." The word was a surrender. "God help me, I won't." When he kissed her, it was nothing like she'd imagined. Not rough or desperate, but slow, deliberate. As if he was memorizing the moment, the taste of her, the way she fit against him. She melted into it, her hands finding the fabric of his shirt, anchoring herself to him. He tasted like whiskey and exhaustion, and something darker, wilder, something that matched the reckless courage blooming in her chest. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "This is a terrible idea," he said. "Probably. I'm going to hurt you." Not intentionally, but, "Dylan." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "I know who you are, what your life involves. I'm choosing this anyway. Stop trying to make my decisions for me." A smile ghosted across his lips. "You're stubborn. You're one to talk." He laughed, the sound surprised and genuine, and she felt it like sunlight breaking through clouds. "All right," he said. "But we do this my way. You stay here until the threat is contained. No arguments." "How long?" "However long it takes." She should have protested, insisted on her independence, but the memory of footsteps in her cottage, the violation of her space, still made her skin crawl. "Okay," she said, "but I'm not hiding. I'm not going to be a prisoner." "You won't be, but you'll have protection. One of my men will be nearby whenever you go out." "Dylan." "Non-negotiable." His expression was firm. "You want to make your own choices? Fine. But this is mine. I won't lose you because I was too proud to take precautions." The words, "lose you," hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was ready to fully acknowledge. "Fine," she conceded, "but I need things from the cottage, my art supplies, clothes. Make a list. I'll have someone pack them. I can do it myself." "Joanne." His hands settled on her shoulders, his gaze intense. "Please, let me do this. Let me keep you safe in the ways I can." The vulnerability in his voice undid her. "All right." Relief flickered across his face. "Thank you. But I need coffee, and food, and maybe a shower." "Of course." He stepped back, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "The guest room is upstairs, second door on the left. There are towels in the bathroom. Take whatever you need." "And you?" "I have calls to make. Arrangements." His jaw tightened. "I need to send a message that you're under my protection. Make it clear what happens to anyone who touches you." A shiver ran through her, fear and something else she didn't want to name. "What kind of message?" "The kind they'll understand." He leaned in, pressing a kiss to her forehead, gentle and devastating. "Don't worry, I'll handle it." As she watched him walk away, pulling out his phone, switching seamlessly into rapid French, Joanne realized she'd crossed a threshold she couldn't uncross. She was in his world now, for better or worse. The shower helped. Hot water sluiced away the grime of fear, though it couldn't touch the deeper exhaustion. Joanne stood under the spray, eyes closed, trying to process the past 12 hours. "Someone broke into my home. Dylan kissed me. I'm living in his house. He's sending messages to dangerous men on my behalf. When laid out like that, it sounded insane, like the plot of a thriller novel she'd never choose to read. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that this, terrifying as it was, felt more real than anything she'd experienced in years, more honest, more alive. She dressed in borrowed clothes, one of Dylan's shirts, soft from washing, that fell to mid-thigh, and a pair of joggers she had to roll at the waist. When she came downstairs, she found him in the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low, clipped tones. He looked up as she entered, his eyes tracking over her, and something shifted in his expression, softened. "Je te rappelle," he said into the phone, then hung up. "Everything okay?" "It will be." He moved to the espresso machine, began making coffee with practiced efficiency. "I've put the word out. By this evening, every person in certain circles will know you're mine." You're mine. The possessiveness should have rankled. Instead, it sent heat pooling low in her belly. "And that will stop them? It will make them think twice and give me time to deal with the problem permanently." "How?" He handed her a tiny cup of espresso, perfect crema on top. "There are ways, leverage, alliances. Sometimes all it takes is the right information in the right hands." "Blackmail. Mutually assured destruction," he corrected. "I have files, documents, recordings, things that could destroy careers, lives, empires. They have similar things on me. It's equilibrium." "That sounds exhausting." "It is." He leaned against the counter, cradling his own cup. "But it's the world I inhabit. The price of refusing to compromise on certain things. Like trafficking, among others." She studied him, this man who'd built walls of secrets and threats to protect his principles. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone harder, maybe. Colder." "Give it time," he said, but there was a hint of warmth in his voice. "For you might change your mind." "I doubt it." They drank their coffee in companionable silence, the morning light strengthening through the windows. Outside, birds began their chorus, the world waking to a day that looked normal, ordinary, despite the chaos roiling beneath the surface. "I need to ask you something," Dylan said finally. "Okay. Why did you really come to Provence?" She'd told him before. Escape. Heartbreak. But there was a depth to the question now that demanded more truth. "I was disappearing," she said quietly. "In my relationship, in my job, in my life, I'd become this echo of myself, agreeing with everything, apologizing for existing, making myself smaller so he'd have more room." She set down her cup, meeting Dylan's gaze. "One morning I woke up and didn't recognize the woman in the mirror, so I left." Was he cruel? Not in any obvious way. He just didn't see me. And I let him not see me, because it was easier than fighting to be visible. Understanding flickered in Dylan's eyes. "And now? Now I'm done being invisible." He crossed to her, cupping her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "Joanne Brooks, I see you. Every stubborn, brave, infuriating inch of you." "Good," she whispered, "because I see you too." And when he kissed her this time, it felt like a promise, like the beginning of something neither of them could name yet, but both were brave enough to try. The estate became their world. For 3 days, Joanne didn't leave the property. At first, it felt like captivity, a gilded cage, however beautiful. But slowly, as the hours unfolded into a rhythm that felt almost domestic, she began to understand it differently. Not captivity. Sanctuary. Dylan worked from home, conducting business from his study, a room lined with books and maps, dominated by a massive oak desk where he spent hours on calls in multiple languages. She'd catch glimpses of him through the half-open door, pacing as he negotiated, leaning back in his chair as he listened, his expression shifting from charm to ice in the space of a heartbeat. He was dangerous, she realized. Not to her, but to anyone who stood in his way. And strangely, that didn't frighten her as much as it should have. In the mornings, she'd wake to find coffee already made, a note in his elegant handwriting telling her where he'd be. Sometimes the notes were practical, in meetings until noon. Help yourself to anything, but other times they held something softer. The sunrise was remarkable. I thought of waking you, but you looked too peaceful. Next time. The promise in those 2 words made her heart race. She spent her mornings exploring the estate. The library became her favorite refuge, floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with volumes in French, English, Italian, Arabic. First editions nestled beside well-worn paperbacks. Philosophy texts sharing space with thriller novels. It was the library of someone who read widely, voraciously, without pretension. She pulled down a copy of Rilke's letters to a young poet, found passages underlined in pencil, notes in the margins in Dylan's handwriting. This he'd written next to a passage about solitude. Always this. It felt intimate, seeing his thoughts laid bare on the page, like reading his journal. She was replacing the book when she heard voices from below. Sharp. Argumentative. Joanne moved to the railing overlooking the entrance hall and saw Dylan standing with 2 men in expensive suits. One of them was gesturing angrily, his face flushed red. The other stood silent, watchful, his hand resting near his jacket in a way that made her stomach clench. Dylan's posture was relaxed, almost casual, but she'd learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the slight narrowing of his eyes. Vous n'êtes pas en position de faire des demandes, Dylan said, his voice soft but cutting. You're not in a position to make demands. The red-faced man stepped closer, jabbing a finger toward Dylan's chest. Tu vas le regretter. Dylan moved so fast Joanne almost missed it. One moment the man's finger was pointed at him. The next Dylan had his wrist locked in an iron grip, twisting just enough to make the man gasp and drop to one knee. Touch me again, Dylan said in English, his voice like silk over steel, and you'll leave here in pieces, comprise? The man nodded frantically. Dylan released him with a dismissive flick of his wrist. The second man helped his companion up, both of them backing toward the door. Dylan followed, his movements predatory, herding them out. She heard the door close, the snick of the lock, then silence. Joanne realized she was gripping the railing, her knuckles white. She forced herself to breathe, to relax her hands. When she came downstairs, she found Dylan at the bar, pouring whiskey with hands that weren't entirely steady. How much did you see? He asked without turning. Enough. He downed the whiskey, poured another. I'm sorry, that shouldn't have happened here. Are you all right? He turned then, surprise flickering across his face. You're asking if I'm all right? You're shaking. He looked down at his hands, seemed almost surprised to find them trembling. Adrenaline, it passes. She crossed to him, gently took the glass from his hand, and set it aside. What did they want? The same thing they always want. Compliance. His jaw tightened. They're running out of patience. Are we safe? Yes. They're not stupid enough to act against me directly. Not yet. He caught her hands in his grip firm, grounding. But they're escalating, testing boundaries. What happens when they cross a line you can't ignore? Then I'll handle it. How? His eyes met hers, and she saw something dark there, something that reminded her exactly who he was, what he was capable of. However, I have to. A shiver ran through her, not fear exactly. Something more complicated. She should be terrified, should be packing her bags, calling a taxi, running back to the safety of her ordinary life. Instead, she stepped closer, closing the distance between them. I'm not afraid of you, she said quietly. You should be. But I'm not. His hands came up to frame her face, his touch achingly gentle despite the violence she'd just witnessed. Joanne, you're the best thing that's happened to me in longer than I can remember, and I'm going to destroy you. It's what I do. I destroy beautiful things. No, she said firmly. You protect them. I've seen you. The way you talk about your grandmother, the way you take care of the people who work for you, the way you've made sure I'm safe even when it complicates your life. You're not a destroyer, Dylan. You don't know the things I've done. So tell me. He stared at her for a long moment, some internal war playing out behind his eyes. Then, slowly, he led her to the sofa, poured them both wine and began to talk. He told her about the early years, after his grandfather died, and left him the business. How he'd been young, ambitious, hungry to prove himself. How he'd made deals with people he shouldn't have trusted, compromises that had seemed small at the time, but had accumulated into debts he couldn't repay. There was a shipment, he said, staring into his wine. 5 years ago, I thought it was textiles, high-end fabrics from Morocco, but when it arrived I found out what it really was. Antiquities, stolen from archaeological sites, priceless pieces of history being sold to private collectors who'd lock them away forever. What did you do? I should have called the authorities. That would have been the right thing. His mouth twisted bitterly. But I was afraid. The people I'd made the deal with, they had connections, power. I convinced myself that exposing them would destroy my business, hurt the people who depended on me. So you let it go? Worse, I delivered the shipment. He finally looked at her, and the self-loathing in his eyes was painful to witness. I took the money. I told myself it was just objects, that no one was getting hurt. I told myself a lot of lies. Joanne absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. But you stopped. Eventually, when they came back asking for more, wanting me to expand the operation, that's when I realized what I'd become, what I was enabling. He set down his wine, his hands clenching into fists. So I said no, and I've been saying no ever since, no matter what they threaten or promise. The women they wanted you to move would never have been the first time if I'd kept saying yes to the harmless things. His voice was raw. Every compromise is a step toward the next one. I learned that too late. But you learned it, and you stopped. That doesn't erase what I did. No, she agreed, but it matters that you're trying to do better now. He looked at her with something like wonder. How are you not running? How are you sitting here looking at me like I'm not a monster? Because you're not. You're a man who made mistakes and is trying to atone for them. That's not a monster. That's just human. Joanne, we've all got things we regret, Dylan. Choices we wish we could take back. Mine just happened to be smaller, less dramatic. But the shame feels the same, doesn't it? The weight of knowing you weren't your best self when it mattered. His throat worked as he swallowed. Yes. So maybe we're both just trying to be better than we were. Maybe that's enough. He pulled her to him then, his arms wrapping around her, his face buried in her hair. She felt him shaking, with relief or grief or something between, she couldn't tell. You're too good for this, he murmured against her temple. Too good for me. Stop deciding what I deserve. That's my job. A sound escaped him, half laugh, half sob. God, you're stubborn. You've mentioned that. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other as the afternoon light shifted through the windows, painting golden rectangles across the floor. In the afternoons, they cooked together. Dylan taught her to make fresh pasta, his hands guiding hers as they shaped delicate ravioli, filled them with ricotta and herbs from the garden. His touch was always careful, never assuming, but the air between them crackled with tension that built with every accidental brush of fingers, every shared smile. You're a natural, he said, watching her crimp the edges of a perfect square. Liar. This one looks like roadkill. Delicious roadkill, she laughed, flicking flour at him. It dusted across his dark shirt, a white constellation against the fabric. He looked down at it, then up at her, one eyebrow raised. Did you just... I have no idea what you're talking about. Is that so? Before she could react, he dusted his flour-covered hands across her nose, leaving white streaks she could feel but not see. Dylan! What? I have no idea what you're talking about. His eyes danced with mischief, an expression so different from his usual intensity that it transformed him, made him look younger, lighter. She retaliated, and within moments they were both covered in flour, laughing like children, the kitchen a disaster zone of white powder and abandoned pasta. When they finally subsided, breathless and still grinning, Joanne realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this free, this wholly completely herself. Dylan reached out, brushing flour from her cheek with his thumb, the gesture tender. You have it everywhere. So do you. Worth it. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then back to her eyes. Joanne. Yes? I want to kiss you. But if I start, I'm not sure I'll be able to stop. Her breath caught. Maybe I don't want you to stop. Something blazed in his eyes, heat and hunger and careful restraint all warring together. You don't know what you're saying. I do. I'm tired of being careful, tired of protecting myself from feeling anything real. This is real, he said, his voice rough. Too real. That's what scares me. Then be scared with me. He closed the distance between them, his hands sliding into her hair, tilting her face up to his. The kiss was different this time, deeper, more urgent, tasting of flour and wine and desire held too long in check. She melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. He made a sound low in his throat, backing her against the counter, his body a wall of heat against hers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. We should stop, he murmured, though his hands remained tangled in her hair. Should we? I don't want to rush this, don't want to take advantage. Dylan. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. I'm making a choice. Freely. Without pressure. I want this. I want you. You're staying in my house, under my protection. The power dynamic is only a problem if you're using it to manipulate me. Which you're not. She traced the line of his jaw, felt the muscle jump beneath her fingers. Stop trying to protect me from my own decisions. It's what I do. Protect people from themselves. Protect people I care about from me. The admission hung between them, vulnerable and raw. What if I don't need protecting from you? She asked softly. What if what I need is just you? He kissed her again, and this time there was surrender in it. A letting go of the careful control he'd maintained since the moment they met. They didn't make it to the bedroom, didn't make it past the living room, stumbling together to the sofa, hands and mouths and whispered words in the golden afternoon light. He was careful with her, achingly gentle, his hands mapping her body like she was precious, breakable, even as she urged him on, wanting more, wanting everything. Afterward they lay tangled together, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her shoulder. "I don't regret this," she said into the silence. "Good. Neither do I." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "But it changes things. I know. They'll use you against me now, more than they already were. Let them try." He shifted to look at her, his expression serious. "Joanne, I need you to understand. What we just did, it put a target on you. Made you a vulnerability I can't afford but won't give up. Then we'll deal with it together. You say that now, I'll say it tomorrow too, and the day after." She propped herself up on one elbow, meeting his gaze. "I'm not going anywhere, Dylan. Not unless you want me to." "I don't." The words came fast, vehement. "God, I don't. But I should. Good thing you're not as noble as you think you are." He laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. "No, I'm really not." They stayed there as the sun set, painting the room in shades of amber and rose, neither willing to move to break the fragile peace they'd carved out in the middle of chaos. Tomorrow would bring new threats, new complications. But tonight, they had this. And for now, that was enough. At night, they sat on the terrace with wine, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Lyon, about his grandmother's iron will and his grandfather's quiet kindness, about the moment he'd decided to build something that mattered, even if the cost was high. She told him about her childhood in Manchester, about the sister who'd always been the beautiful one, while Joanne faded into the background, about dreams of being an artist that had been gently, persistently discouraged until she'd stopped dreaming them at all. "Do you still have your paintings?" he asked. "The watercolors?" "A few. Back in London. Most I threw away." "Why?" "Because someone I trusted told me they weren't very good." Anger flashed in his eyes. "Your ex?" "It doesn't matter." "It does." He set down his glass, turning to face her fully. "Art isn't about being good. It's about being true, honest. Those paintings were pieces of you. He had no right. Dylan, promise me something." His intensity pinned her in place. "Don't let anyone make you small again. Not him, not the world, and especially not yourself. Promise me." The fierceness in his voice, the way he looked at her like she was something precious and strong all at once, it undid something in her chest. "I promise," she whispered. "Good." He pulled her close, tucking her against his side. "Because the woman I see, she's brilliant, brave, strong enough to walk away from everything familiar and start over in a foreign country. That's not small. That's extraordinary." She blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the simple truth in his words. "No one's ever seen me like that before." Then they weren't looking. They sat in silence, the night deepening around them, stars emerging one by one in the vast Provençal sky. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The air smelled of night-blooming jasmine and the faint smoke from a neighbor's chimney. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," Joanne said suddenly. He considered for a moment. "I'm afraid of ending up alone. Of pushing away everyone who gets close because I think it'll keep them safe. Of waking up one day in a fortress I built to protect myself and realizing I'm just in a very elegant prison." The vulnerability in his admission made her throat tight. "You're not alone. Not anymore. Neither are you." She turned in his arms, kissing him softly, tasting wine and promises on his lips. "I'm falling for you," she said against his mouth. "I know it's too soon, I know it's complicated, but I need you to know I'm falling." His grip tightened, his breath catching. "Joanne, you don't have to say it back. I just needed to say it out loud. To be honest about what this is for me." "I'm already there," he said roughly. "Have been since you stood in your garden with terrible coffee and looked at me like I was a puzzle worth solving. I'm already so far gone it terrifies me." This kiss was different, deeper, full of all the words they couldn't yet say, all the futures they were too afraid to name. When they finally went inside, hand in hand, the night felt different, charged with possibility. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Joanne felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be, even if that place was more dangerous than anywhere she'd ever been before. The morning of the fourth day brought rain, heavy and relentless, drumming against the windows like impatient fingers. Joanne woke alone in Dylan's bed, the sheets still warm where he'd been. She could hear him downstairs, his voice low and urgent, speaking rapid French into the phone. Something had changed. She could feel it in the air, thick with tension. She dressed quickly in jeans and one of his sweaters, soft cashmere that smelled like him, cedar and citrus, and made her way downstairs. Dylan stood in the study, his back to the door, one hand braced against the window frame as he spoke. His shoulders were rigid, his free hand clenched into a fist at his side. Non, absolument pas. No, absolutely not. His voice was ice. Dis-leur que s'ils veulent la guerre, je leur donnerai la guerre. Tell them if they want war, I'll give them war. He ended the call with a vicious jab of his finger, then stood perfectly still, his head bowed. Dylan? He turned sharply, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. Fury, fear, and beneath it all, a devastating resignation. What happened? She asked, moving toward him. They took someone. His voice was flat, carefully controlled. Luke, one of my drivers. A good man. He has a wife, 2 daughters. Horror washed through her. Oh, God! Why? Because I refused their latest demand. Because I made it clear you're under my protection, and they wanted to demonstrate that my protection isn't absolute. His jaw clenched. They're using him as leverage, telling me if I don't cooperate, they'll... He broke off, turning away. What do they want? Me to move another shipment, and to hand over the files I have on them, everything that's kept us in equilibrium for the past 6 months. If you give them the files, I lose all my leverage. They can do whatever they want without consequences. To me, to everyone I've tried to protect. He dragged a hand through his hair. But if I don't, Luke dies. Joanne felt the weight of it settle over the room like a shroud. There has to be another option. There isn't. Not one that doesn't involve more bloodshed than I'm willing to accept. He looked at her then, and the anguish in his eyes made her chest ache. This is what I meant. This is what being close to me costs. Good people suffering because I made enemies. This isn't your fault. It is. The words came out harsh, self-lacerating. Every choice I've made, every line I've drawn, it all led here. To Luke in a basement somewhere, terrified, while I decide whether his life is worth more than my principles. She crossed to him, taking his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. Stop. You didn't kidnap him. You're not the villain here. Aren't I? I knew this could happen. I knew they'd escalate. And I still... He pulled away, pacing like a caged animal. I should have sent you away. Should have ended this before you got tangled up in it. I'm already tangled up in it, and I'm not going anywhere. Joanne, what time is the exchange? He stopped pacing, turned to stare at her. What? The exchange. When do they want to meet? Tonight. Midnight. An old warehouse near Marseille. His eyes narrowed. Why? Because we're going to get Luke back. We're not doing anything. I'm handling this. How, by giving them everything they want? If I have to, yes. She shook her head. There's another way. There has to be. And what would you know about it? The words came out sharp, dismissive, and immediately he looked stricken. I'm sorry, I didn't mean you're scared, I get it. She kept her voice calm, steady, even as her heart raced. But you're not thinking clearly. You said you have files on them, right? Damaging information. Yes, but if I hand them over... You don't hand them over. You use them as insurance. Make it clear that if anything happens to Luke, or to you, those files go public. Automatic release to journalists, authorities, everyone. He stared at her. A dead man's switch. Exactly. I already have something like that in place, but they're calling my bluff. They think I won't risk Luke's life to maintain it. Then we make it real. Make it immediate. She was thinking fast now, ideas tumbling over each other. What if you give them copies of the files but keep the originals? Or better yet, give them fake files that look real enough to satisfy them temporarily. They'll have experts verify them. How long would that take? A few hours, maybe a day. Then that's the window. You get Luke back, they think they have what they want, and by the time they realize they don't, you've already moved him and his family somewhere safe. Dylan was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly racing through possibilities, scenarios, risks. It could work, if we're careful, if we move fast enough. So let's be careful. Let's be fast. He crossed to her, gripping her shoulders. This is dangerous. If they suspect anything, if they catch on. I know. People could die. I know that too. His eyes searched hers. Why are you doing this? You could walk away, go back to your cottage, pack your things, leave France altogether. Be safe. Because Luke has daughters who need their father. Because you need help, even if you're too stubborn to ask for it. And because... She took a breath, steadying herself. Because I love you. and I'm not letting you face this alone." The words hung in the air between them, stark and undeniable. Dylan's expression crumbled. He pulled her against him, his arms crushing her close, his face buried in her hair. "You shouldn't love me. This life, these complications, too late." He laughed, the sound broken. "God, you're impossible. So are you. We're well matched." He pulled back enough to kiss her, desperate and tender all at once, as if she were both his salvation and his destruction. "All right," he said when they finally broke apart. "We do this together, but you follow my lead. Exactly. No improvising." "I can do that. And if things go wrong, you run. You don't look back. You don't try to help. You just run and get somewhere safe. Promise me." "Dylan, promise me, Joanne. I can't do this if I'm worried about you." She saw the fear beneath the command, the genuine terror that something might happen to her. "I promise. Thank you." He kissed her forehead, a benediction. "Now let's figure out how to save a good man and destroy some very bad ones." The next several hours were a blur of preparation. Dylan made calls, to lawyers, to contacts in various industries, to people whose names he didn't share and whose purposes she could only guess at. He worked from his computer, accessing encrypted files, creating elaborate fakes that would pass initial scrutiny, but fall apart under deeper investigation. Joanne watched him work, marveling at the precision of it, the careful attention to detail, the way he thought 3 steps ahead of everyone else. "You're good at this," she said. He glanced up from the screen. "At deception? At strategy? At protecting people? Let's hope I'm good enough." By mid-afternoon, he had a team assembled. 4 men arrived at the estate, not the suited guards she'd seen before, but rougher types, men with scars and steady eyes who spoke in terse sentences and checked weapons with practiced ease. Joanne's stomach churned watching them, the reality of what they were about to do settling like lead in her gut. One of the men, older, with grey threading through his dark hair, approached her. "You're the English girl." "Joanne." "Mark." He didn't offer his hand, just studied her with assessing eyes. "You don't look like someone who belongs in this mess." "I don't, but here I am anyway." A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. "Dylan said you were stubborn. He wasn't wrong." He glanced toward where Dylan was conferring with 2 other men. "You know he'd burn the world down for you?" The casual certainty in his voice startled her. "We barely know each other." "Doesn't matter. I've worked for him for 8 years. Never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Like you're both his best hope and his greatest fear. I don't want to be his fear. Too late for that. Anyone he cares about becomes a vulnerability. That's just the reality of this life." Mark's expression softened slightly. "But for what it's worth, I think you're good for him. First time in years I've seen him care about something beyond just surviving." Before she could respond, Dylan called Mark over, and the moment was gone. As evening approached, Dylan pulled her aside. "You're not coming to the warehouse," he said. "What? We agreed. We agreed you'd help with the plan, not that you'd be in the line of fire." His tone was gentle but immovable. "You'll stay here with one of my men. If something goes wrong, he'll get you out of the country." "Dylan, no. Please." He cupped her face, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "I need to know you're safe. I can't think clearly if I'm worried about you getting caught in the crossfire. And you think I can think clearly knowing you're walking into danger? I've done this before. I know how to handle myself. That doesn't make it less terrifying." "I know." He rested his forehead against hers. "But this is my world, my mess. I need to be the one to clean it up." She wanted to argue, to insist on staying by his side, but the look in his eyes, the quiet desperation, stopped her. "You come back to me," she said fiercely. "Whatever happens, you come back." "I will. I swear it." "And Luke?" "Him too. Or I don't come back at all." They stood there for a long moment, holding each other, memorizing the feel and warmth and solidity of it. Then he kissed her, slow and deep and full of promises, and pulled away. "I have to go." "I know." She watched from the terrace as they loaded into 2 dark SUVs, engines rumbling to life in the gathering dusk. Dylan looked up at her once before climbing in, his expression unreadable in the fading light. Then they were gone, taillights disappearing down the lane. And Joanne was left alone with her fear and a guard named Philippe, who barely spoke but watched the perimeter with unwavering attention. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. Joanne paced the living room, unable to sit still, unable to focus on anything but the clock ticking toward midnight. Philippe had made coffee, offered food, but she couldn't stomach anything. At 11:47 p.m., her phone buzzed. A text from Dylan. In position. Radio silence from here. I love you. Her hands trembled as she typed back, come home safe, I love you too, then nothing. Midnight came and went. 12:30, 1 a.m. The silence was unbearable. At 1:23 a.m., headlights appeared in the distance. Joanne's heart leapt into her throat. She ran to the window, Philippe close behind, his hand on his weapon. The SUVs pulled up to the house. Doors opened. Dylan emerged first, followed by Mark and the others. And then Luke, stumbling slightly, one arm around Mark's shoulders for support. Relief crashed through her so violently she had to brace herself against the wall. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. She ran outside, meeting Dylan halfway across the courtyard. He caught her, lifting her off her feet, burying his face in her neck. You're okay, she breathed. You're okay. We're okay. He set her down, cupping her face. It worked. The fake files bought us enough time. Luke's safe. His family. Already being moved to a safe house in Switzerland. New identities, new life. They'll be protected. Tears streamed down her face. Relief, joy, residual terror all mixing together. I was so scared. So was I. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. But it's over. For now. For now. His expression darkened. They'll realize the deception soon. When they do, things will get worse before they get better. But I've made arrangements, moved assets. By tomorrow, I'll have enough leverage to bury them permanently. How? The files go to the authorities, all of them. Everything I've been holding back. His jaw set with determination. I'm done playing their game, done compromising. Whatever consequences come from exposing them, I'll face them. But they're done hurting people I care about. Joanne stared at him, understanding the magnitude of what he was saying. You could go to prison. I could. Probably will, for some of it. He held her gaze steadily. But it's the right thing to do. The thing I should have done a long time ago. Then I'll be waiting when you get out. His eyes widened. You can't. That could be years. I don't care. She gripped his shirt, holding tight. You said I matter to you. Well, you matter to me too. And I'm not running just because things get hard. Joanne, no. You don't get to push me away now. Not after everything. Her voice broke. I love you. I'm staying. End of discussion. He kissed her then hard and desperate, as if he could pour all his gratitude and fear and love into that single point of contact. I don't deserve you, he murmured against her lips. Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway. Behind them, Mark cleared his throat pointedly. Boss, we should move inside, not safe out here. Dylan nodded but didn't let go of Joanne's hand as they walked toward the house, fingers intertwined. Inside, Luke sat at the kitchen table, a blanket around his shoulders, hands wrapped around a mug of tea that steamed into the air. He looked up as they entered, his eyes red-rimmed but grateful. Merci, he said hoarsely. Thank you. My daughters are safe, Dylan assured him. And so are you. You'll join them tomorrow, once we're certain there's no tail. Luke nodded, tears spilling over. I didn't think. I know. Dylan gripped his shoulder. But you're here. That's what matters. Mark and the others were already planning next steps, safe routes out of the country, contingency plans, what to do when the files went public. Joanne listened, marveling at the precision of it all, the way they worked together like a well-oiled machine. This was Dylan's world. Dangerous, complicated, built on a foundation of secrets and careful alliances. And she was choosing to stay in it. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. Hours later, after Luke had been secured in a safe room and the guards had taken up positions around the property, Dylan led Joanne upstairs. They collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion finally catching up with them. I can't believe we pulled it off, Joanne murmured, her head on his chest listening to the steady thump of his heart. We make a good team. Terrifying, dangerous, possibly illegal, but good. He laughed softly. That's one way to describe it. They lay in silence for a moment, the weight of the night settling over them. What happens now? She asked. Tomorrow the files go out. By tomorrow night, every major news outlet in Europe will have them. Interpol, the French authorities, probably half a dozen other agencies. He stroked her hair absently. There will be arrests, investigations. Some of it will blow back on me. And you'll handle it. I'll try. We'll handle it, she corrected. Together. He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. I love you. I don't say it enough, but I do. More than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. I love you too. She tilted her face up to kiss him. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Deal? Deal! They sealed it with another kiss, slower this time, tender and full of promise. Outside, rain continued to fall, washing the world clean. And inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Joanne and Dylan found a moment of peace in the eye of the storm. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. But tonight, they had each other. And that was enough. 3 months later, Provence bloomed with spring. Joanne stood in the garden of her cottage, truly hers now, purchased outright with money Dylan had insisted on lending her, though she was slowly paying it back, surveying the riot of color that had emerged from the warming earth. Lavender pushed through the soil in neat rows. Wild roses climbed the stone walls. Sunflowers turned their faces toward the morning light. She'd rebuilt this place, made it a home. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind. The files had gone public exactly as Dylan promised, triggering an avalanche of investigations across 3 countries. Politicians had resigned, business empires had crumbled, and yes, there had been consequences for Dylan too. He'd spent 2 weeks in custody, while authorities sorted through his involvement, his cooperation, his own complicated role in the web of corruption he'd exposed. In the end, they'd offered him immunity in exchange for testimony, a deal his lawyer had negotiated with ruthless efficiency. The men who'd threatened them, who'd kidnapped Luke, who'd built their power on trafficking and exploitation, they were facing decades in prison. Some had already been convicted, others were awaiting trial. Dylan had won, but the victory had cost him. Half his business contacts had severed ties, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Investments had fallen through. Partnerships had dissolved. He'd lost millions in the space of weeks, but he'd also gained something he'd been missing for years: freedom. Joanne heard footsteps on the gravel path and turned, smiling as Dylan emerged from the olive grove. He wore jeans and a simple white t-shirt, his feet bare, his hair slightly longer than when they'd met. He looked relaxed in a way she'd never seen before. Lighter. Morning, he said, pulling her into his arms. Morning yourself. Sleep well? Better than I have in years. He kissed her temple. Though I missed you when I woke up. I wanted to see the sunrise and check on the garden. It's beautiful. You have a gift for this. I'm learning. Still kill more plants than I save, but I'm learning. They stood together watching the light strengthen over the valley. In the distance, church bells rang, calling the faithful to Sunday Mass. I have news, Dylan said. Something in his tone made her look up sharply. Good news or bad news? That depends on your perspective. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. I've been offered a position. Consulting work for an international organization that fights human trafficking. They want someone who understands how the networks operate, how to disrupt them from the inside. Her heart skipped. Dylan, that's amazing. It would mean travel, a lot of it. Europe, Asia, Africa, sometimes dangerous places. But important work. Yes, he met her eyes. Work that matters, that might actually make a difference. She saw the hope in his face, fragile and new. This was what he'd been searching for, a way to atone, to use everything he'd learned in the darkness to bring light. When do you start? That's the question. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands. Because I'm not taking it unless you come with me. Her breath caught. What? I want you with me, Joanne. Not here, waiting. Not living separate lives connected by phone calls and video chats. I want you beside me. His grip tightened. I know it's asking a lot. You've built a life here, made this place yours. But I'm asking anyway. As what? Your assistant? Your bodyguard? As my partner? In every sense of the word. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Joanne's heart stopped. I know it's fast, he said, opening the box to reveal a simple ring, a single sapphire the color of twilight, set in aged gold. I know we've only known each other a few months, most of them chaotic and terrifying, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. He met her eyes, his own suspiciously bright. I love you. I want to build a life with you. Face whatever comes next together. So, Joanne Brooks, will you marry me? Tears blurred her vision. She'd come to Provence to escape, to disappear, to hide from a life that had been slowly erasing her. Instead, She'd found a man who saw her completely, who challenged her, who believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. She'd found herself again. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, of course, yes." His expression transformed, pure joy breaking across his face like sunrise. He slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, then kissed her until they were both breathless and laughing. "You're sure?" he asked against her lips. "It won't be easy. The work is dangerous, the travel constant." "I'm sure." She cupped his face, thumbs brushing his cheekbones. "I didn't come all this way to play it safe. I came to live, really live, and I want to do that with you. God, I love you. I love you too." They kissed again, deeper this time, the morning sun warm on their skin, the scent of lavender and earth surrounding them. When they finally broke apart, Dylan rested his forehead against hers. "We should celebrate. Champagne, a proper dinner, maybe—" "Or," Joanne interrupted, sliding her hands under his shirt, feeling the warmth of his skin, "we could go inside and celebrate privately first." Heat flared in his eyes. "I like the way you think." He swept her up, making her laugh as he carried her toward the cottage. She wrapped her arms around his neck, her ring catching the light, scattering tiny rainbows across the stone walls. Behind them, the garden bloomed in riotous color. Ahead, the cottage door stood open, welcoming. And beyond that, beyond Provence, beyond France, beyond everything familiar, lay a future neither of them could fully predict. But they would face it together. Two people who'd been running from their pasts, who'd found each other in the most unexpected place, who'd chosen love even when it was complicated and dangerous and thoroughly impractical. Dylan set her down just inside the doorway, kicking it closed behind them. Then he pulled her close, kissing her with a thoroughness that promised this was just the beginning. "Ready for an adventure?" he murmured against her mouth. She smiled, fierce and bright and unafraid. "With you?" "Always." And as morning light flooded through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold, Joanne Brooks, soon to be Joanne Marchand, knew she'd finally found what she'd been searching for. Not peace, not safety, not the quiet escape she'd thought she needed, but something better. Purpose, partnership, a love worth fighting for.